The last few months have been a very bewildering time for all of us. It feels like the world has changed, and not only once, but it seems to change every few weeks as the different restrictions come and go. It felt for a while like we were coming out of lockdown into some form of normality, and now we're worried about going back into it again. We're worried about a new spike in the autumn. Is there going to be one? Will we be able to see our families and embrace them? Will we be able to shake hands with anybody evermore? Will we go to sports events, concerts? What about the economic forecasts of the future? Will there be jobs for people coming out of university or of college or a school? What about those who are in jobs in industries which are really challenged by the financial constraints that the pandemic will bring about? It all seems very unsettling and very unstable. The world seems to have shifted, and it really makes us feel very vulnerable. Now, I want to look at this sense of change in the world through the lens of one of the most powerful symbols that has emerged in recent times. In the evenings, in our family, we've taken to the habit of going out for a walk. And when we do that, when I walk past shops and houses, I keep on seeing one thing again and again, and it is pictures of rainbows. Rainbows are everywhere. In fact, here in Twickenham, where we live, the zebra crossing across the main street has been repainted as a rainbow. Now, of course, the rainbow has become a way of thanking the NHS and key workers in our society, people who've done an amazing job at supporting the wider community at great sacrifice of themselves. But of course, the rainbow is a powerful symbol, not just in the present day towards key workers in the NHS, but it has deep roots in the past. And I want to go back to its use in the Bible, because really that's where the idea of the rainbow as a symbol comes from. Now, of course, we see the idea of the rainbow as a symbol in the story of the flood that we find in the early chapters of the book of Genesis. This was a flood that seems to have spread across the known world at the time. We read stories of it, not just in the book of Genesis, but in some of the other ancient Near Eastern texts at the same time. The flood seems to have been a kind of natural disaster, a little bit like COVID, a bit like the pandemic we're in at the moment. And there are other similarities too, because in the middle of that flood, Noah builds an ark. If you like, he socially isolates within his own space, along with his family bubble, taking his wife and his children and his wider family within his own space. And he hunkers down until the storm has passed. And gradually the waters begin to subside. And we're told in chapter 8, the waters gradually receded from the earth. And it feels a little bit like what we're in at the moment. We're past the peak of the pandemic. We're not yet out of it. And so we're wondering what the future will be like. Now, when the flood is over, God gives a symbol, and the symbol is a rainbow. And the rainbow is a symbol of God's faithfulness and commitment to the earth. The text runs like this. It says, "As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease." Now, this, we're told, is a covenant, not a contract. It's important to grasp the difference between those two things. A contract is where two parties enter into a common agreement. And the idea is that if one party doesn't fulfill their side of the bargain, the other party is free to walk away. So when you take on a job, you might sign an employment contract where you offer your time and your skills in return for getting paid. Now, if your employer decides to stop paying you, you're free to walk away from that contract. At the same time, if you stop working, your employer is entitled to stop paying you at the same time. A covenant, however, is different. In a covenant, we enter into an agreement where we say, whatever the other person does, I will keep my side of the bargain. I will be faithful to my promises, whatever happens. Perhaps the most well-known covenant that we ever enter into, of course, is marriage, where we say, for better or for worse, for richer, for poorer, we will keep our promises, whatever happens to the other person and whatever they do. Now, that's a covenant. And this is what God enters into in this story. God enters into a covenant with the earth, where he says, whatever happens, I will keep my promise. Now, he enters into a covenant, firstly, with the earth, with the planet upon which we live. In this story, it says this: I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you and with every living creature that was with you. The birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. We've experienced great change in the last few months. And yet underneath, there is this steady, sure thing that when we look around us is always there. It is the steady rhythms of nature. when we go on our evening walk, one of the things we often do is walk by the river. We walk by the River Thames, quite near where we live. And it often strikes me when we go past it that that river has been there not just for decades, and not even for just centuries, but it's been there for millennia. Before even any human activity was around, that river was flowing in that place. Also reflect, as we've seen spring go into summer, and we will see it go into autumn and the winter. Those rhythms of nature are always there. Seeds go into the ground, they germinate, they grow, they flower, and then they die away, and the seeds go into the ground and the rhythm continues. And animal life, birds and animals have their young, they grow, they die, and so on, the next generation comes. Underneath all the change that's going on around us, there is this steady, unchanging, reliable rhythm of the natural world, which is for us a sign of God's faithfulness and commitment to the world, that he will not give up on it. So the rainbow is a sign that God is committed to the earth. He is committed to the deep rhythms of nature, and we can rely on them when everything else is in flux. But it's a sign not just of the rhythms of nature, but it's a sign even beyond that, of the steady faithfulness of God. That underneath all the changes that are going on around us, that steady rhythm of nature points to something that does not change: the faithfulness, the love, the mercy of God, which is always there for us, and that can be relied upon whatever happens to us and whatever pandemics or plagues come our way. When we see a rainbow, yes, it's a sign of thanks to the key workers in our society, but maybe even more than that, it's a sign that this thing will end. COVID will not be with us forever. That just as the flood came and it went, the time will come when we will be able to meet together again, when we will embrace our families, where we won't see strangers in the street as a threat and walk on by the other side. It may take time, but it will come. That's what the rainbow is a symbol of. The rainbow is a symbol of hope. And hope is something we need more than anything else right now. It's a promise we find very often in the scriptures. In Psalm 46, we read this: God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear. Though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. God is committed to the earth. But beyond that, God also enters into a covenant with the human race. He enters a covenant with Noah and his descendants. And it's a commitment to the entire human race. Now, this is different from the covenant that God enters into a little bit later on in chapter 12 and chapter 15 of Genesis, where he enters into a covenant with Abraham, the Hebrews, the people of Israel. That's a different kind of covenant, where they are called to be a blessing to the rest of the human race. But before that covenant comes this covenant that God makes to the entire human race. And this covenant comes with a command. And the command is to respect the image of God in each other person. It says in chapter 9, verse 6, and from each human being too, says God, I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being. For in the image of God has God made humankind. One of the issues we've been also aware of in recent times is the great spectre of racism in our society, in our church, and in our hearts as well. But if we pause for a moment and think, why do we care about race? Why do we think that racism is wrong? It's not always been obvious that that's the case. I read a book a number of years ago called Inventing the Individuals by Larry Siedentop, an American political philosopher. And he describes the way in which the idea of the individual, as opposed to more corporate understandings of humankind, have emerged in recent centuries. And he writes about how in early times in the human race, cultures tended to think that you had a commitment to people who were part of your tribe or part of your family, but you certainly didn't have a commitment beyond that. The people who were really valuable, the people you wanted to invest in, were people who could do something for you, people in your tribe or beyond, not anyone else beyond that. This idea that every single human being is worthy of respect, despite their ability, despite their ethnicity, whether they're related to us or not. Where do the roots of that idea come from? It's not always been obvious. And the answer is it comes from this ancient set of stories in the book of Genesis. This idea that all of us, every single human being, is of equal worth, derives from the idea that we all derive from the same source, that we are made in the image of God and loved by that same God, regardless of our ethnicity, our background, our wealth, our status, or whatever it may be. And therefore the rainbow, which goes back to this idea of every human being being made in the image of God, is a sign of God's commitment to the whole human race. It's a sign of God's love for each person you meet today. Every person that you and I may meet today, whatever colour, whatever background, is made in the image of God, and they carry a value independent of your or my estimation of them. Whether you and I like them or not, whether we're related to them or not, makes no difference. They still bear the image of God and are therefore worthy of respect. And yes, we care for those who are close to us. We care for our family. We have a particular responsibility to them. But that doesn't gainsay our care and our respect for every single human being who is worthy of respect because they are made in the image of God. And so the rainbow is this symbol that God is committed to the earth, but he's also committed to the entire human race. But it goes beyond that to point towards the covenant with Abraham, because the covenant with Noah is also a sign of God's commitment and covenant to the church. Noah in Christian thinking was often been seen as a kind of forerunner of Jesus Christ. Just as God saves the world through Noah, if you like. He restarts the human race out of the mess it's got into through Noah and his family. That kind of points forward to the way in which in the New Testament, Jesus Christ is the one through whom the whole human race is saved. He is the new Adam, the new humanity. The ark has often been seen in Christian theology and history as a picture of the church, a community of people rescued from the world, called to live new lives in a new world, bearing witness to the God of love, the God who created the world, the God who's committed to the world, and the God who preserves it in every day. That is the task of the church, and the ark is a picture of those very things. So the rainbow is a sign that God is committed to the church, his people, called to bear witness to his love and mercy in the world. Now, as we draw these reflections to a close, what do we do differently? As we emerge out of lockdown, as we come into this strange, uncertain period, what do we do differently, bearing in mind this covenant? Well, let me suggest this, that if God is committed to the earth, to the human race, to the church, then on the one hand, we rely on those promises and we rejoice in them. But at the same time, if God is committed to those things, I suggest so should we be. And it might be that we want to ask the question, how will you and I show our commitment to those three things as God does? God's commitment to the earth tells us why pollution and the climate emergency is such a sin, because it's working against the purposes of the God who preserves the natural rhythms of the world. And that when we work to address climate change, we're not on our own in doing it, we are working with the grain of God's promise. So what will you do? What will I do? One of the things I've tried to decide to do is to ride my bike and to walk a little bit more, to drive my car a little bit less. Maybe you want to work in your garden to really tend that bit of land that God has given you, if you have one. Maybe find some public space outside that you can care for and make look beautiful and make as a reflection of the beauty of the world that God has made. God's commitment to the whole human race. We've been reminded in recent times that we don't do this very well. And we tend to make distinctions in our own hearts and minds towards other people who don't look like us or feel different. And it may be you want in this time to deliberately reach out to someone you know of a different race and background and to build a relationship and try to understand them, or seek to understand them a little bit better and their experience. One of the things I'm trying to do is meet with someone regularly who can help me understand a little bit more about their experience as someone from a different ethnicity than mine, and help me to understand some of the things that are going on in my heart as I think about people who are different from me too. And then the commitment to the church. Hopefully in these past months, as we've not been able to meet together in the normal way, maybe you've discovered how much you miss meeting together. And as we emerge out of this and as we come back into church, which feels quite different, maybe both online and in person, what is it that you and I can do that's different? What can we bring to the new forms of church that are coming? Maybe there's something we can give in terms of helping out with the technology, or cleaning the church, or being present, or being engaged with the church, supporting it in whatever it might be. Is there something you and I can do differently as we emerge into this new form of church, which is old but new, that will enable the church to grow and meet the challenges of these times? The rainbow is a reminder of what really matters to God. The earth, the human race, and the church, called to bear witness to his love and mercy in that world. And if those things matter to him, they should matter to us.